Lunch and Learn. We are doing a wonderful sustainability series right now with weekly talks all about different areas of sustainability. Today we are going to be talking about wind energy and specifically wind energy's impact on birds, because that's a question I know that comes up for a lot of people. There's like, we love the idea of wind energy, but then you hear all the problems with birds. So we've brought in some wonderful ladies. They're going to tell us more about that and how that works. So we're very excited to have them. I do want to just send out a thank you so much to Visit Bucks County, who through their partnerships for community tourism grants, we're able to fund this series of programs. So we're really excited about that. And we also have, just to let everyone know, we have a program next Wednesday. We're talking about geothermal, and then we are taking a break. We are not having a program the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And then we have two programs, the first two Wednesdays of December, which should be really great. They're all about sort of habitats and native plants. And one is about sort of what you can do in your backyard, and one is actually more focused on green rooftops. So we're really excited about all of that. So I'm going to turn this over to Laura and Judy, who have agreed to do our talk today. We're very excited to have them, and I'm going to let them take it away.
All right. Thank you, Stacy. I'll share my screen. And I'm going to get rid of my video because of my internet connection sometimes being slow. But can everybody see the screen all right? I guess I will need to know that.
Yep, we can see it, Grace.
You can see that? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to do the first part of the presentation, and then Judy will do the last part. I'm a retired science teacher, basically biology and environmental science. I taught in Bedford for many years, and I was also an adjunct professor at Allegheny Community College from Maryland. So I got interested in wind energy in 2005 when I got a phone call from a person in Bedford County who told me that there was a proposed wind project on a mountain in the northern part of the county, which is where I live in Bedford. And I went to a conference and I thought I better learn more about it because I teach about it too. And that's when I found out about all the wildlife impacts that wind has. So I've really traveled the country looking at wind projects. I've toured a lot of projects, and I've studied wind energy since 2005. And it's really become a very deep concern for all the impacts that wind has on wildlife. So it is clean and green compared to a lot of other projects, types of energy projects, but it does have its issues. So I took this picture when I visited California. Altamont Pass has the highest raptor kill of any wind project in the United States. Thousands of raptors are killed every year. And I looked at that and I thought, I hope that never comes to Pennsylvania, but we are getting more and more wind turbines in our state. Let's see here. And one of the reasons why I didn't think it would come to Pennsylvania is that we don't have a good wind resource. If you look at the middle part of the country, that's called the Saudi Arabia of wind because of the great wind resource. If you look over at Pennsylvania, we don't have much in the way of wind resource. In fact, we only rate 30 out of 50. So to be a good wind resource, you need consistent winds, you need strong winds, very little turbulence, and buildings and trees cause turbulence, so do mountains. And you need a capacity factor, or that results in a capacity factor of 40 to 45%. In Pennsylvania, though, and a large part of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, we have variable winds. We don't have much wind. We have turbulence because of the trees, the buildings, and the mountains. And that means that we just generate a capacity factor of 25 to 30%. And you're probably asking, well, what's a capacity factor? So that's the ratio of electricity that's actually produced compared to the maximum output. In other words, it's how reliable the energy source is. So here's a chart from 2019 for Pennsylvania, for the United States, showing the different energy sources and what the capacity factor is for those sources. And you can see that nuclear rates at the top. So that 93.5%, just to make it a little simpler, if you had a power plant that was nuclear and it generated 100 megawatts, it would be producing 94 megawatts on a very reliable basis. Geothermal is somewhat less, and you can see as we go down, we get to natural gas, we get to coal, hydroelectric, wind's down here at 35%. And then some of these other gas-powered plants that are at the very bottom have a low capacity factor because they're turned off a lot. They basically exist to create the void. When the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, then that's when these natural gas plants are put into play. So they have a low capacity factor on purpose. So looking at the wind projects across the United States, this is a good resource map. It's from the USGS office. And I'm zoomed out, so those little white circles are either individual turbines, but more likely they're clusters of turbines. They're different projects. So across the United States, we have 65,548 turbines, a total capacity of 108,942 megawatts. Now, because of the capacity factor, though, in 2019, wind only produced 37,912 megawatts. So let's zoom into the map. Let's look at some individual turbines. So each of these little white circles is a turbine. And I just took a screenshot of part of the Allegheny front. And that's the big escarpment that runs from south central Pennsylvania down into West Virginia. It separates the ridge and valley system over here on the right from the Allegheny Plateau. And this screenshot shows 174 wind turbines on the Allegheny front. Farther south are 169 turbines that are not shown, but I wanted you to see the individual placements, so that's why I just pictured some of it. And on the Allegheny front, there's a total of 343 turbines in Pennsylvania. That's almost half the Pennsylvania turbines that we have in the state. And it's because the wind resource is better on the Allegheny front than it is in other areas. We produce a lot of energy in Pennsylvania. In 2019, we produced more electricity than any other state except Texas and Florida. And that energy is in high demand. We export 30% of it, a huge amount, to other states. New Jersey, Delaware, south of us, north of us. Those states are all hungering for our electricity. But where does our electricity come from? Of course, it's not just wind turbines. 43% of our electricity comes from natural gas power plants. 36% comes from nuclear. This is in 2019. Coal has been really reduced, just 17%. And renewables just can't seem to get out of that 4% slump. So if we break down renewables, hydro is 1.6% of our total electricity production. Wind is just 1.3%, and biomass and solar are even less. So you can see that we don't really have much of a big impact for renewables in Pennsylvania. But by 2021, we do have to produce 18% of our electricity from what's called alternative energy sources. And this graph shows you that we're pretty close to that right now, 15.2%. And I've read some reports that say we won't have any trouble getting to 18% in 2021. But notice it says alternative energy sources, not renewable energy sources. Our state legislature has decided that for alternative energy, they'll take solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, all of these in tier 1 pretty much are renewable. But then they also accept tier 2, and that includes waste coal, demand side management, which is part of our electric grid here, and large scale hydropower. So there's a dichotomy between what's truly renewable and it all lumps together as alternative. So let's look at those energy sources. Here's a picture I took from a plane looking at the Allegheny front. And I think you'll all agree with me that on appearances, the wind turbine project certainly has a much softer, a smaller ecological footprint. This in the bottom part of the picture is a reclaimed strip mine where they're trying to control acid mine drainage. So that scar on the land is much more severe than wind. And we have to keep in mind, though, that it's not a choice between wind or coal. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We didn't have wind until the early 2000s, and it really hasn't made that much of a difference in our energy production, but it does have a big footprint in terms of amount of land that's used because it's very diffuse. It's not very dense. Fortunately, though, a lot of the coal power plants have been shut down in Pennsylvania. This is the Bruce Mansfield coal power plant in Beaver County that no longer runs on coal. And question for you, why are so many coal plants shut down? What do we do in their place? How can we exist in Pennsylvania without all this coal? The reason we can do it is because cheap natural gas from fracking. And natural gas certainly has its problems. It certainly pollutes. It's not a clean energy. It's from fossil fuels, but it's cheap. And that has really changed the energy dynamics in Pennsylvania. In fact, one of the reasons we have so many wind turbines is because we have so much gas. The gas can fill in when the wind stops blowing. Let's take another big picture of Pennsylvania. It's amazing. We have about 60% of Pennsylvania that's in forest, but not all forest is created equal. Some forests are healthy, some forests are not. This is a better map showing you that 60% of forest. Situated up here in the northern tier is called the Songbird Nursery of Pennsylvania because we have so much intact forest cover. As we go farther to the east or farther to the west, we see not much forest. And even in this area, the ridge and valley where I live, there's a lot of fragmentation of forest. So not all forest is created equal, but it's amazing that we do have 60% of ground cover and trees. Now, hidden in that forest, though, we have transmission lines. Fragmenting the forest, we have transmission lines. And remember, Pennsylvania only ranks 30 out of 50 in wind resource, but because we have so much transmission line crisscrossing the state, we can have a lot of wind projects. So why do we have so much wind if we don't have a good wind resource? Again, in this map, you can see this is the Allegheny front right here that I talked about earlier, the best wind resource in Pennsylvania. There's a little bit more scattered around some of the other areas, but developers have concentrated on the Allegheny front and a few other areas because we have subsidies, because we have all these transmission lines, makes wind energy cheaper to build. We have the mountains, which creates a wind current. And also, very importantly, we have an electricity market. We sell so much electricity to other states. Our electric rate in Pennsylvania is below average, but all the states to the north of us and some to the east and south have higher electricity rates than we do. So it really makes the electricity market very attractive to generators. Another map to show you where these projects are located in Pennsylvania. So we have 26 operating wind projects. Those are the red circles. We have 5 proposed wind projects. Those are the black ones. And then we have one project that's not on the map because it was decommissioned and the turbines were knocked down. And that was the first project ever to go in Pennsylvania and near Garrett, Pennsylvania. So again, this is the Allegheny front right here. And then you can see some of the plateau areas have projects as well. I've been told, though, that the low-hanging fruit for wind development is full. And so these projects that you see in black are areas that are going to need taller turbines to make it economical. Let's look at the global IBAs and the continental IBAs and the state IBAs in Pennsylvania. because this is a concern that I have. You can see that a lot of our IBAs, here's the state IBA, again, the Allegheny Ridge, loaded with turbines. Here's the big Songbird Nursery, has one project. The newest project in Pennsylvania is Big Level Wind, has really tall turbines compared to some of the other ones. Fortunately, if you look at the red line, that's the Kittatinny Ridge, and that's a global IBA. We don't have turbines on that. But being from the western part of the state, I really think that the Allegheny front should be a global IBA. I think we have enough data now to show that it can do that. But yet it's already been really built up with turbines. We have just two small turbines down, or two small project down here, which is the Frey Farm along the Susquehanna River. But all the other ones are built on mountaintops. And I think it's a shame that so many IBAs have wind development in them. Another way to look at the resource in Pennsylvania is to consider what is the risk that wind development places on birds. So here's a map from the American Bird Conservancy. This is a global IBA, the Allegheny National Forest area, and that's very high priority. The lighter orange is not quite as high priority. And then you get the other global down here, which again is the Kittatinny Ridge. But this huge swath through the Ridge and Valley system and onto the Allegheny front is a really important habitat and migration corridor. And the American Bird Conservancy actually signals this part, and I'll put it in green, as the Golden Eagle Key Migration Corridor. And we have a lot of hawk watches scattered around through here, especially an important one on the Allegheny front. And then last year, some researchers looked at Bald Eagle Ridge, which is the next ridge to the east, and found an amazing number of golden eagles migrate south along this corridor. So we have a huge responsibility, I feel, to birds that migrate through and also birds that nest in Pennsylvania. Taking a close look at just what a wind turbine is, this is our pickup truck parked beside it to give you a sense of scale. These are utility poles over here. And the wind turbine itself, of course, is big. It has to be big to capture the wind. Usually an acre or 2 acres are cleared around it. This one was actually built in a farm field in Somerset County, so they didn't have to clear many trees. The turbine, though, itself weighs about 800 tons of steel and carbon. And so it needs to be supported. So a good bit of what you don't see, of course, is underground. But we were fortunate to be able to visit a project while that was being built. That's my husband standing what is going to be covered up and hidden by the ground. It's a concrete base. It's about 60 feet in diameter. And this is fairly typical, except for the new turbines. They have even a bigger diameter. It's about 10 feet deep with reinforced steel. And then we came back the next week and they had covered that part, that grid work of steel with concrete. And it's just amazing. And just think of it. We have 700 some turbines in Pennsylvania. Each turbine has this structure underneath it. Over 1.5 million pounds of concrete, almost 2 million pounds of steel. So about 1721 tons per turbine to support it. And that's important because the turbines are so heavy, but it's a huge amount of resource that we're putting into the ground. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that industrial wind projects affect people too. There are rural communities all across Pennsylvania fighting turbines, trying to keep them off their mountains. It's not just a NIMBY attitude. A lot of mountains have an important water resource. And so the water authorities see this as a way of getting funding, and they're putting turbines on their water resources. And that, we hope, will not affect groundwater and sources for communities, but it's a gamble. Here's another project in Somerset County called the Twin Ridges Project that I took from an airplane. And this is on the Allegheny front. So imagine if you're a bird flying south or north during migration, what you're going to have to go through to be able to survive. And we'll talk about bird mortality a little bit later. But these are 68 turbines in a double row. And it affects people. This is a small poster or sign that a person made and put outside their house. It says, "If this is God's country, why are we living in the dark, deep depths of hell?" And it turns out that they built their house, and then about 3 years later, Twin Ridges was built, and they have 6 turbines right behind their house. So it's a big impact on people in terms of health, emotional, and that's a whole other topic though. So back to birds. If you're a bird lover and you want to get out to McGee Marsh, you might have seen this billboard. This is in Ohio, very close to Lake Erie. And Judy's going to talk some more about the project proposed for in the lake, but people are working hard in Ohio to try to keep turbines off the lake shore. And that's where I took this billboard picture. So what are the problems in Pennsylvania and other states? Just to kind of summarize this part of it, wind power development is driven by state alternative or renewable energy portfolios, not economics or science. All the current habitat protection guidelines are voluntary. There isn't a single regulatory part of this in Pennsylvania. DEP regulates the road construction, and that's all. So the siting of projects is really directed by how close they can be to transmission lines, not ecological impacts. Another issue is the public never gets to know what the real impact is, especially when it comes to bird and back hills. I'll talk a little bit later about what the Game Commission has shared, but most data the public does not see. Cumulative impact assessments are ignored. There's no state agency looking at the cumulative impacts. Some companies do conduct breeding bird surveys before and after the projects go in, but it's very limited. And the data documenting endangered species at a site have sometimes been removed from company reports to agencies. So that's a big issue. The wind companies are in charge of all the research. They hire the professionals and they look at the data and they control the data. And I don't think that's right. So we're going to talk about forest fragmentation because it's a big issue on bird survival. This was an intact forest before a company came in and put in the Allegheny Ridge project. This was during the construction phase, but just imagine how many trees were removed. And the road building is tremendous. So when you build a road through a forest, like the top picture shows, you're creating that open gap and you're creating a very straight edge. And those edges have impacts. So you get a new habitat, the microclimate changes, it gets drier, there's more soil erosion, a lot more human activity on these roads, even roads that are closed to the public. People on four-wheelers are able to get around, and we've been to different projects where we've walked on the roads, but four-wheelers have been there too. So there's more human activity. Definitely more runoff, lots of space now for invasive plant species. So we're looking at long-term changes. And of course, more predation because predators love those open roads as well. The bottom picture shows a country road that was very narrow, had trees almost to the edge of the road, but because of all the underground cables and fiber optic cables that are needed for the projects, you can see that now the opening is 100 foot wide. So definitely changes the dynamics of a forest. And it affects the birds that live there. Like I mentioned, there's more predation and parasitism. Wood thrush and veeries and other birds are very sensitive to cowbird because of the parasites. And so you can see here that these parasitic cowbirds have laid 2 eggs in a veery nest. And the birds don't realize, and oftentimes those young cowbirds are bigger and they push the little birds out of the nest. Here's a picture of an adult scarlet tanager parent feeding what it thinks is its offspring, but it really isn't, it's a cowbird. And then we have a global and continental responsibility. We're a keystone state for 3 species. Scarlet tanagers, about 12% nest in our forest, and they need huge blocks of forest. The same way with the worm-eating warbler, 10% nest in Pennsylvania, and about 9% of wood thrush nests in Pennsylvania. And you might say, well, I've seen wood thrush in my little backyard woods, but are they successful nesters? Research has shown they're not. They're really vulnerable to predators when the woods are small. They need big blocks of forest. And here are some more birds that are definitely impacted by fragmentation and the edge effect. Some of our beautiful warblers and more sensitive species. Some of them may not nest right where you live, but they nest in Pennsylvania, and they're impacted by forest fragmentation. So here's an example from the air of the Allegheny Ridge Wind Project that I showed you earlier. This is the forest before the project went in, this big intact block of forest. 75 turbines were built along with the roads, and this doesn't show all the turbines, but the roads that they put in to carry the equipment and to be able to move from turbine to turbine are wide, even wider than the State Route 140 that did exist. So it fragments the forest. And what's that impact? Well, here's an aerial view, because when you're down on the valley looking up, you don't see all those openings. You just see the turbines sticking up above the trees. But there are openings and wide roads between all of them. And so biologist Kim Van Fleet took this diagram or the map, and she diagrammed the edge effect. And the edge effect, based on research by many biologists and ornithologists, they think now extends up to 300 yards into the forest. So that equals 1,600 more acres of forest impacted than just along the roads, or a total of 2,400 acres altogether. So it's just not the road, that impact goes into the forest. Pennsylvania has some rare habitats. One that I think is really special is the pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And I picked two habitats to show you that are rare, that are pretty close to Bucks County, and maybe some are even in Bucks County, I'm not sure. But the pitch pine scrub oak barrens is very rare. It's imperiled in Pennsylvania. It's so rare. And that means that, of course, it's home to some species that are pretty important. Prairie warbler here, Appalachian cottontail here. And here's what's happened to some of those barrens. One example is the Locust Ridge 1 and 2 Wind Project. There are 64 turbines in Columbia and Schuylkill counties. They went right through that habitat with 15 miles of roads, plus buildings, substation, transmission lines. You know, this was privately owned forest, and it unfortunately was not protected. Another example, which I really love to visit, is on Moosic Mountain. You might have heard of that. That's north of Bucks County. It contains a ridgetop heath barrens, which again is a very rare habitat. And this area contains the largest concentration of globally rare animal and plant species in Pennsylvania. And when we visited it, we were lucky to see Canada warblers. And I did some research on Canada warblers, one of my favorite warblers. The highest percentage of Canada warblers in the Appalachians breed in Pennsylvania in these high ridgetop forests. So I think we have a duty to protect those birds. But again, a large part of this mountain was privately owned. And in Wayne County, 43 wind turbines were built as part of the Waymart Wind Project, over 5 miles of roads. And unfortunately, that fragments these and destroys these really rare habitats. The good news is, in 2018, the Game Commission was approached by this company. They wanted to put it in an extended southern part, and the Game Commission denied it. The company fought back with petitions and pressuring legislators. So the Game Commission the Juniata Valley Audubon Society that I'm a member of garnered almost 2,000 signatures supporting this ruling, and the company eventually withdrew their project. And more good news, in 2018, the Game Commission passed a resolution prohibiting wind projects on state game lands. Birds, unfortunately, are also killed by associated transmission lines. and they can't read. They don't know that the voltage is really dangerous. There's a person, a scientist in California, Dr. Smallwood, who's an expert on bird mortality on wind turbines. And his research shows that in 2012, we had about 51 megawatts of wind that killed about 573,000 bats and 573,000 birds and 888,000 bats. And of course, the wind just keeps growing. And now into 2020, we have twice that amount of megawatts. And he projects that we have more than twice the amount of bird and bat kills. So back to Pennsylvania for a minute, the Game Commission has developed a cooperative agreement that's voluntary, and some wind companies have signed on. So 18 of the projects in Pennsylvania are part of this agreement. And that means that the Game Commission works with those companies to try to minimize impacts. And the companies have to promise to follow best management practices to create minimized impacts. But of course, the projects still go in. The Game Commission can't stop them from doing that. And one of the agreements is that they'll do post-construction studies and pre-construction studies. Well, this just started in 2007. So one company did that. And you can see that as a result of 1 year's worth of work from May the 1st to November 17th, these were the amounts of dead birds that they found. And not very much, but human searchers are not reliable. Dr. Smallwood says that dogs should be trained and used for mortality searches. And when that's been done at wind projects, they find a lot more dead birds. And even though the companies are supposed to follow the protocols from the Game Commission, I've been on several tours where managers told us, well, the searchers come in, they sit down, we have our coffee break at 10 o'clock. They're supposed to be out there at dawn. They go out and they look around for a couple hours. And now if it's raining, we don't go out. If there's a threat of a storm, we don't go out because those turbines are too dangerous. So they're really not following Game Commission protocol. And again, that makes these numbers very invalid. Another report came out the following year in 2011. And this time they summarized the 1 site from 2007, 4 sites from 2008, and 6 sites from 2009. And so in this case, they found a lot more birds over those periods of time. And of note is that there were 3 species, actually 2 species that were endangered that were killed, 2 black-polled warblers and 1 yellow-bellied flycatcher. But because they're part of the cooperative agreement, they're not prosecuted if they kill an endangered species. That's kind of the carrot that the Game Commission holds out to make these companies want to sign on. The second summary report, though, also went on to list 31% of the bird mortality included, and I just highlighted ruffed grouse because that's really in sharp decline in our state. Some top predators, red-tailed hawk, broad-winged hawk. We don't know exact numbers. These are just percentages. And some oddly, it's kind of odd to think that a Sora rail was flying over a turbine and got killed. But look at all the songbirds that were killed. 35% of them were red-eyed vireos, 8% golden crowned kinglet. And there may not be huge numbers. We don't really know the number. But look at the diversity of birds that have been killed by wind turbines. And again, this is just using human searchers using very poor protocol. Those projects were only studied for 2 years. And then there's a long length of time where there weren't any projects built in Pennsylvania. Now we have 2 fairly new ones, and I'm assuming they're doing the studies. But again, I'm not going to think that the data is reliable. In their last summary, the third and last summary in 2012, they came up with an average of 4 birds per turbine per year. And again, that's just from 19 surveys. We have no data at all on 283 turbines because not all the companies are part of the cooperative agreement. So we really have no clue what birds or bats were killed. And it's sad, really. And I have to mention birds and bats, because there are more bats that are killed than birds. From the data that the Game Commission collected from just those few projects, they found that one wind turbine killed an average of 25 bats per year. So we have 700 some turbines, some 25 bats per year. Scientific American says, and I quote, "Wind power is the largest cause of mass mortality for bats worldwide. And wind farms can create a cascade of unintended effects within an ecosystem by essentially acting like top predators. When they kill hawks and eagles and other raptors, wind turbines are acting like top predators, and that affects the food chain and the food web." Mike and I, my husband and I, were in northern Cambria County doing some research on wind turbines one winter, and we were lucky enough to see this endangered short-eared owl, endangered in Pennsylvania. Nobody does any mortality studies in the wintertime, and we just had to hold our breath as we watched this owl fly in the shadow of the turbine. Fortunately, we don't have any records of golden eagles being killed in Pennsylvania, but we know they are susceptible to turbines. So we've worked with Dr. Todd Katzner and Dr. Trish Miller, a whole host of other researchers, to try to document the risk that wind turbines have to golden eagles. And this map shows you in dark blue the valley areas that are low risk, and then in red and yellow, the areas that are higher risk. And one thing their research has shown that really was a shock to everybody is that golden eagles, you probably know they don't nest in Pennsylvania, they just migrate through, but some of them spend the winter in Pennsylvania. They spend the entire months of snowy cap mountain ranges looking for food. And so we had Trish Miller and several other researchers do a report for us because a wind company wanted to put turbines on Jack's Mountain in Mifflin County, and then another row of turbines on Stone Mountain. There are going to be over 100 turbines on these two mountains. So Trish Miller and others put trackers on golden eagles, and all these colored lines show the movements of golden eagles during the winter time between 2008 and 2013, showing that they spend, like right here, a lot of time on the mountain areas. So nobody monitors golden eagle mortality in the wintertime. We just have no data at all for Pennsylvania. National Audubon's position on wind power, though, is that Audubon supports wind energy that is sited and operated properly to avoid, minimize, and mitigate effectively for the impacts on birds and other wildlife and the places they need now and in the future. To that end, we support the development of wind energy to achieve 100% clean energy. So the question I have for you, are wind projects sited properly in Pennsylvania? Based on my research, I say no. So that ends my part of the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing right now so Judy can take over. I hope people are still awake and glued to the screen.
Hey, Judy, you're still muted.
All right, this will just take me a minute and
while she's doing that, I put our emails at the end of the PowerPoint. I didn't tell that to Judy. So she probably doesn't have that screen, but I can share that at the end so that if anybody wants to email us with questions or comments, feel free to do that. And I don't know if there's anything in the chat box too.
There was a question in the chat box and Judy responded to it, but if we have a minute, if you want to as well. The question was asked about the study that had come out about the idea of painting one blade black on the things as lowering bird kills.
Okay, yeah, I'm reading Judy's answer. We had discussed this before, and I agree with her. It was an extremely small study. They just chose a couple turbines out of a fairly large turbine project. And I don't know what protocols they followed. So yeah, Judy says she'll answer more. And she actually gave her email, and I'll put my email as well if anybody has any other questions to contact us.
I'm sorry, I'm not good at this. I've got the PowerPoint open, but then I don't know how to get to the share screen in Zoom.
So if you're in the Zoom window, down at the very bottom of the screen, there's a green button that says share screen. Click on that.
Okay, hang on. Okay, now I see it. All right, great, thank you.
And then choose your presentation and hit share. There we go.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm Judy Stepenaskie, and I'm a member of Wind Audubon, and I'm the co-chair, along with Laura, of the Renewable Energy Working Group for Audubon, Pennsylvania. And we started up in this past spring, and our members are from a number of different chapters throughout Pennsylvania. I just want to put an opening out there. If anybody's interested in joining us, you'd be welcome to. And one of our members is Will Bach from Bucks County Audubon. One of our goals is to provide information to chapters and members. We want to enable chapters to work with municipalities so that wind, solar, and other renewable energy projects are not sited in critical bird areas. And also ensure that projects are appropriately sited and that they include provisions for bird safety, habitat and environmental protection, compensation for habitat loss, and decommissioning measures. We've been working with National Audubon, Audubon Pennsylvania, and the Audubon chapters. Well, everybody wants clean, green, renewable energy. It's a new buzzword. However, there is no magic bullet and no free lunch in solving the climate problem. Just because something says clean, green, does not mean that it's good for birds or the environment. Laura talked about wind, but both utility scale wind and solar cause environmental degradation. They lead to habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. With solar, there are unexplained bird deaths at solar farms. We don't know yet why this is happening. But the biggest threat actually to birds from solar energy is from habitat loss. And as Laura talked about, with wind, solar projects are being mostly located in rural areas. This means more transmission lines and more bird deaths. So what's going on in Pennsylvania? We do have clean energy goals, as Laura talked about. There are no siting regulations whatsoever for any form of so-called clean energy. There are no protections for prime farmlands, grasslands, and we know that grassland birds are in decline right now. Forested lands, there's nothing preventing somebody from cutting down a forest and covering the land with wind turbines or with solar panels. And this is being done in other areas, in other states. There are no protections for critical habitats or important bird areas. With solar, presently there are no size limits in Pennsylvania for solar projects. Other states have projects that cover miles and miles and miles of land. In addition, there are federal and state subsidies and tax credits which encourage not just the good projects, but the projects that are harmful to birds and the environment. In Pennsylvania right now, what Laura mentioned is the Game Commission said, public lands are off limits. Public lands are presently used for oil and gas drilling. And there's a push among certain legislatures and among parts of the public to use these public lands for renewable energy. They're also pushing legislators and the public are also pushing for wind farms located on mountain ridges and for offshore and onshore wind farms on Lake Erie. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the Icebreaker Wind Energy Project. And this is a demonstration project to be located in the Lake Erie waters offshore in Ohio. It's called a demonstration project because this is supposed to lead the way for development of offshore wind energy all throughout Lake Erie. And there's a lot of money being put into it by the federal government. Anybody who's been to McGee Marsh knows that it's a major migratory bird pathway. And that's the reason we go there. All these birds fly over the lake, they're exhausted, they drop down into the bushes and we can look at them. And it's not just McGee Marsh, but the American Bird Conservancy says that all of the shore of Lake Erie is important for migratory birds. To the right, you'll see one of the favorite migratory birds that you see right off the bird boardwalk building its nest, the prothonotary warbler. Audubon has called Lake Erie, this portion of Lake Erie in Ohio, a global IBA, and that's because 70% of the world's red-breasted mergansers can be found in Lake Erie. In leading up to this project, National Audubon was very involved in setting up conditions for bird safety, and they testified on requirements needed for monitoring, for an abatement plan. If they do find bird kills, they need to do something. Other organizations also involved either with opposing the projects and also with the conditions of the projects to make sure that they are safe for birds were the American Bird Conservancy and Black Swamp Bird Observatory. In May, the Ohio Power Sighting Board ruled that the project could go ahead, but there were bird protections. There's a lot of monitoring that's required before they even start, and none of that has been done. There's monitoring during the project, there's abatement plans needed, and they required feathering or turning off of the turbines from May 1st to November 1st, turning them off at nighttime when birds migrate from May 1st through November 1st. So this was the ruling in May. The developers called this a poison pill, saying, well, we can't go forward with the project. It'll cost too much money. And major environmental organizations appealed this ruling along with the developer. They filed suits to stop the bird protection ruling. And basically, I'm a member of several of these organizations. With one of them, I actually stopped. I used to give monthly contributions to, but I don't do that anymore. Basically, their goal is 100% clean energy, no matter what, no matter where. We don't care about bird protections. Audubon's position talks about sighting, and the American Bird Conservancy also has a lot of information and strong positions about bird protections. So what can you do? First of all, get involved in your local EAC and look at their renewable energy plans. Ask questions. Where are they getting this energy from? How is it produced? Where is it produced? And one of the best things as far as birds are concerned is to prioritize distributed solar. This is solar on local places, rooftops, residences, commercial buildings, schools, parking lots. Cover them with solar panels, industrial sites, brownfields, contaminated areas. These are the spots we should be looking at to cover with solar panels, as well as previously disturbed areas, not farmland. And not, one of the things that they found out, there was an economic study done by Penn State on the impact of community solar. And one of the things they said is that these projects are going to come not just from farmland, but also land that is conserved in this program that the state has where they set aside this land for conservation purposes. That's what's going to go. Another thing you can do as far as Pennsylvania is concerned is advocate for control of methane emissions from natural gas operations. Methane, in the first couple of years after it's emitted, is 80% times more effective, or has 80% times the harm that carbon dioxide does. And tons of methane are being emitted from natural gas operations. And there are regulations about the major wells, but there are no regulations for small wells that continue to emit natural gas, and also from pipelines and from areas like cities where you got this huge natural gas pipeline and there's a lot of methane leaks. So those are a couple of things that you can do. And that's it for me. Thank you. So Stacy, I don't know if you want to have questions or.
Yes, absolutely. All righty. We're a relatively small group, so if you have a question for Laura or Judy and you would like to just unmute yourself, feel free to do so. And we'll take questions for a few minutes, but I want to thank you both. This was really, really great, really informative. Does anyone have any questions? I apologize for my dogs. They're downstairs, but they're really loud.
Yeah, Stacy, I've got a question. If we were looking local level for some ideas of siting regulations, are there some examples around the country that we could look at, we could take up with our EAC?
That's something that we're working on right now. I'd be happy to, if you want to email me, I'd be happy to send you some info, but we're actually working, our working group is actually looking at siting regulations, and we're also going to be giving input to National Audubon on siting of utility-based solar. That's something that National is looking at as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
And just to add to that a little bit, each township and municipality either has zoning or a subdivision, a land development ordinance. Right. I'm not sure which township you live in. You probably have zoning. And it'd be important to check with your supervisors to see if they have an ordinance for solar or an ordinance for wind.
We don't at this point, no.
Okay, so.
I'm in Solebury Township, Bucks County. I'm on the EAC there, and we're in the process of doing an energy transition plan. And I want to put all the best stuff into our plan. So that's why I'd be interested.
Yes, that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I mean, that'd be great. I'd really like to talk to you because, I mean, I live in Philly, we don't have EACs, and we don't have anybody on our committee who's, involved in an EAC. So I know that EACs are important in southeastern Pennsylvania, mm-hmm. in the surrounding counties. And so that's some information I'd really like to talk to you further about that. And okay. Find out what your EAC is doing.
Good. Thank you. I'll send you an email.
Okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Let me just. I just want to make one more comment. I didn't talk about too much about transmission lines. Out west, some of the states do take precautions for birds, for eagles, particularly for golden eagles. They have caps that they put over the transmission lines, but all that costs money. They're doing it out in certain states out west, but they're not doing it here in the east. And that's one thing that can be done. The second thing that can be done is to bury transmission lines. And I understand some of the new developments are doing that, but again, with renewable energy, we're talking about more transmission lines, and the cost of these transmission lines is usually borne by the ratepayers, the people that subscribe for this energy. Right near where about a mile from where I live, we found an adult bald eagle killed. There was a nest I don't know if anybody's familiar, has ever been to Dixon Meadow, but the nest was was close to there. It's also close to Fort Washington State Park. And we'd frequently see the eagles hanging out at Dixon Meadow, but I guess maybe it was a year ago, they found the female was killed sitting below a transmission pole, and the equipment up above had been fried. And so that's the female. This pole was like partway between the nest site and the Schuylkill River. So she was on her way, you know, back and forth from the river. So, and I know that there's been a number of eagle kills in New Jersey because of transmission lines. It's also an issue for ospreys from what I understand. So, you know, I just want to mention that's something else you can take a look at, you know, in your ordinance is transmission lines. I mean, you know, we don't have a great eagle population here, but it does happen. And I imagine there's plenty of other birds being, you know, I'm not sure the numbers of birds, but other birds are killed as well. Okay, thank you.
All righty. Last call for any questions. Perfect. All righty, and it looks like looks like Diane put a link in the about EACs, about getting started with an EAC for Pennsylvania in the chat. All righty, perfect. Again, I want to thank everyone so much for coming today. This was incredibly informative. Thank you so much to Laura and Judy for doing this. We're really excited about this working group. As I mentioned, one of our board members, Will Bach, is a member of this group as well. He will actually be the one who's doing a presentation next week on geothermal. So we're really excited to hear more about that, and sort of always thinking about our birds and thinking about our energy, and hopefully thinking about ways that we can all be more sustainable. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see everyone again next week. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
Thank you.